welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and welcome again, Melinda Cadwallader.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. We have a wonderful special guest today that we're actually Skyping with. His name is Joshua Straub. And Josh, tell us where you're coming from.
I am sitting right now in Branson, Missouri.
Awesome. I think it's so cool that Skype, you can have an interview and be in the same room with somebody who's way far away. So welcome, Josh. So excited to have you here. I'm really thankful that you're willing to do this with us today.
It's an honor to be a part of it, for sure.
Well, just as a short introduction, then I'll let you tell a little bit more about yourself here. But I run some 3-day relationship intensives and have taught people about relationship styles based on attachment theory for several years now. And one of the books that I use in my teaching is God Attachment, Why You Believe, Act, and Feel the Way You Do About God. And you're not Tim. You wrote this book with Tim Clinton, who is the president of the American Association of Christian Counselors, and this is Dr. Joshua Straub. So, Josh, love this book. It's been amazing, and I really think people can relate to why they maybe struggle with God based on some of the ways that they were raised. Maybe they have some anxiety or they have some avoidant tendencies or whatever, and that really can impact you in how you relate with God.
Yeah, and it's been a fun journey. I went to Liberty University to get my PhD, and Tim, who is executive director of the Center for Counseling and Family Studies there, he kind of found me early on and took me under his wing. And then another guy by the name of Dr. Gary Sibsey, who he and Tim have co-wrote some books together as well.
I use that one too.
Yeah. Dr. Sibsey became my doctoral dissertation, the chair of my doctoral dissertation, and he, so I was mentored by these guys in the area of attachment, and it was amazing for me because I got the opportunity to really learn about relationship styles, and what was really neat for me is, and I think the thing that really attracted me to the whole idea of attachment is that it's a meta theory, meaning it can be applied in various different types of therapy and still fit. And not only that, it also, when you look at it through the lenses of Scripture, there's nothing that really contradicts. It really proves Scripture to be true, and shows how we were created for relationship. And so I really love that aspect of it. And not only is it a theory of relationship, it's also a theory of emotion. So it really helps us understand kind of our emotions and what we're feeling, and being able to experience a wide range of feelings from positive to negative emotions. And when you read the book of Psalms, for instance, you see David's just back and forth feeling that he has with God in his relationship with God. And I think that's a very healthy way to be able to navigate our relationships, to be able to experience that and understand what we're experiencing as we get into close relationships. And so anyway, that's really where my excitement came out of it, and being mentored in it, and so it's been the basis of all of my studies, and where that book kind of came from. So,
well, I remember when I was in grad school, I was very interested in attachment, obviously because of my history and our story with our adoption and all of that, and I wanted more on attachment. And I remember in graduate school going to several of the different professors and saying, okay, you have all these classes around addiction or around issues with emotion, anxiety, depression, all of these types of things. But it seems to me that attachment is kind of the root of a lot of these things, and you're not really going into that. Well, you can maybe get a class on that in a doctoral program. And I was thinking, wow, to me it's the basis of everything. So it's really kind of sad that not that many people know about it. And we're not going to have a PhD level conversation on attachment today. That's not the goal. But I love what you're doing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, that you're really trying to help bring this down to a everyday person ability to talk about this and understand it's about relationships. It's about emotions. It's about how to get along in this world in a healthy, secure fashion.
And what's fascinating, Carrie, is we have a a group here locally, and I don't know if other people do or not, but I know it's a national program. It's called Parents as Teachers, and it's a program where everyday parents come into the house and they teach other parents how to teach their kids. Mm-hmm. And being the overachievers that my wife and I are, we signed up for this, and so we have parents and they sit with my wife, and I'm usually not here, so she's usually meeting with them. And she laughed the last time that they were here. She said, "I want you to read the documents that they gave us about our son, he was I think around 15 or 16 months at a time." She said, "I want you to read what they sent," and the documents were all about healthy attachment. And she said, "I didn't tell them what you do." She said, "But what was really cool is it's being now implemented as a core piece of teaching within a lot of these, within the homes and other organizations." So I really believe attachment is at its infancy stages, and there's still so much more we have to learn about it. But it's being implemented more and more throughout culture, and I'm pretty excited about that because, as you said, it's foundational.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have any questions, Melinda? I know you kind of come into this from a different perspective than we do, and we can kind of get off talking on our weird little tangents.
Well, what I love about it is I'm very passionate about people thriving in your church community, and that we are in a season and a culture where there's a lot of division and there's a lot of controversy in people who have left different sects of the church. But I know that it has to do with relationship, and that's something that's on my heart, is building better relationships in church leadership communities. Because if we loved each other like the same way we love our spouse, we would want the best for people, and we want to put them before us, and we'd want to see them thrive. And I would love to see that culture grow and expand and flourish in the ways that you're talking about are so foundational for that to happen. It's good.
Yeah, and that's one of my passions, is being able to implement these kind of principles and topics throughout churches across the country, because I believe it's foundational, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So,
right. Well, Josh, our podcast is called Broken and Brilliant, and the reason that it's called that is because we're looking out to different people throughout the country who have a story of some kind, of a time in their life maybe when they felt totally broken, and how did they move through that place. And maybe they're still in it, but maybe they've kind of come to the other side and have found a purpose in that. And I know that you've got some stories to share, and I'd love to turn it over to you now and let you just share whatever you would like to about that.
Yeah, it's a process, as you know, and it's kind of not necessarily. There's one story I could tell, but I think it needs to be couched in the context of the greater story that I lived, and that is that my parents divorced when I was 10 years old. I remember my mom coming in and telling me that they were splitting up, and of course, as a 10-year-old, I had no clue what that meant, and it completely rocked my world. So I come out of divorce, and there's a moment there where my mom and I have this conversation, and she's moving her things out, and it's just it was a difficult moment for me. But I think, especially as it relates to the way I relate, and as we talk about attachment, we talk about moving from broken relationships to really healthy relationships, safe. There was one time in my life, there was this one moment that my mom and I have talked about, and we've reconciled through this, but I think it's a moment that really defines kind of where I came from and how I started to relate. And I'll never forget, my mom was living in an apartment, and
so were you living with your dad at the time?
I was going every other week. They lived only about 10 minutes from one another, and so I was every other week between two places. And it just so happened to be that day I was at my mom's house, and one of my chores was to burn the trash. Grew up in central Pennsylvania, and you're allowed to burn garbage there, and rural areas. And so burning trash was one of my chores. And so I remember also one of the rules was if there was extra bags laying outside of the garbage can in the kitchen, that was garbage too. So that was going to go to the burn pit. And my stepfather now was dating my mom at the time, and he happened to be there as well, and he said he would help me. So I got the garbage together, I got the the extra bags that were sitting around the garbage, and we took it outside, and I lit a match to it. Later that evening, I was at my dad's house. I'd gone back over to my dad's, and I was at my dad's house, and I remember getting a phone call, and it was my mom. And I remember my dad saying, "Josh, the phone's for you." And of course, at that time, you didn't have cell phones. So, I mean, it was a landline phone, and we had the longest cord around all of the house. And so I remember getting on that phone call, moving from the kitchen to the living room, and my mom just yelling at me from the top of her lungs because I had burned a brand new jacket that she had just bought that day that was sitting right next to the garbage can. And for me, I'm just like, now I'm going, well, duh, don't sit a stinking brand new coat next to a garbage can.
In a bag.
Yeah, and in that moment, I mean, I think I was around 12 or 13 at the time. I just remember just breaking down into tears, feeling like, gee whiz, here we go again. It's my fault. And I can remember laying the phone down in the middle of the living room as everybody in the house can hear her yelling. And my dad picked up the phone and he said, "That's enough." And I remember him hanging up the phone. And,
wow.
My mom and I have worked through that. My mom and I have talked about that moment. It was a really difficult time. And one of the things that she, that I feel like in terms of the way that I then related and where I really started to see my own attachment history come was later on in my dating life. I started dating, got into dating relationships where I started to feel trapped and I couldn't figure out why. And so all through that, basically and this was now in my late teens, early 20s, and what I came to find out was through my master's program and through other various some of these dating relationships that I was dating, that I myself was very passive. I was just very passive in relationships, and if I started to feel like I was losing the relationships, I felt like there was a sense of abandonment there, that I would, and I started, I would tend to be clingy. I would tend to feel like if there was something wrong in the relationship, it was my fault. It wasn't the other person's fault. It was my fault. So it was my fault that I burned that coat that day. It wasn't my mom's fault because she put that coat there. And I started to realize that the more I had this, it led me into counseling, 2.5 years of counseling. And it led me into 2.5 years of counseling where I started to realize that because I thought I came through divorce unscathed. I was one of those kids that my parents were pretty civil. I'd never seen my parents fight until, they got a divorce. My stepfather, my dad and I would hang out together from time to time. Was like this really kind of weird thing, and I was the fixer in the family. I was the firstborn. I was the glue, and so I felt like I came out unscathed. And then that's when I started to when I started hitting these dating relationships is where I really started to go, wow, something's not right within me. I'm seeing a pattern here that's just not good. And I came to
Josh,
find out.
I just want to say that is such an unusual thing for 20-ish guy to look at relationships and have the insight to go, something's not right in me. I mean, it just seems like in the world today, most people go, why is everybody blaming me? And you get this victim mentality and get stuck in that. And it's very unusual, I think, to have a younger man, as in particular. I mean, women aren't too great at it either, but I think it's very interesting that you had the insight to go and seek help and be willing to be that vulnerable and go say, hey, I'm struggling in my relationships. What's going on in me?
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. I think I think there's a twofold answer there. Number one, it was God waking me up. It was, the Holy Spirit living in me, convicting me. And I think number two, it was part of my dysfunction. And I say that because I mean I was an anxious attachment. I realized over time I was anxious, and I had an anxious relationship style. And for those of you watching, what that means is when everybody looks normal when everything's good, it's not until we hit stress and duress in relationships when the chips are falling, that's when our true attachment style, that's when our true relationship style really comes out. And it was in these stressful moments where I felt like I was going to be abandoned that I started to cling, and that I would start to pursue and saw my own dysfunction, because I thought it was my fault. I thought I was the one to blame for everything, and even to this day, I'm the first one. And it can appear godly sometimes, but I also have to check my motives, because for me, on the back end, my motives could be, well, I just want to make sure that they're okay with me. I want, it's about me more than it is the other person, and so I have to balance between whether or not, yes, it's a godly motive, and yes, God, help me to be better, or is it about my need to make sure that I, look good for somebody else, and
as
that
long as you take care of all your stuff, then the issue is with them.
Yeah. So that's kind of where it came out of, and realized that I came out of out of that divorce, just realizing that I needed to step up and be more of a man. I needed to lead. I needed to not just lead, but also in the context of relationships, that not everything was always my fault, and that not everybody was as glamorous as I made them to be, because that's kind of that's part of the insecure attachment style that I had. And
right.
so
we have a tendency to put people on pedestals, especially at the beginning of a relationship, and then when they do something that maybe isn't so perfect, we can slam that throne right out from under them and make them all bad. So it's like they come from this wonderful, glowing beginning of the relationship, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, they're human.
Yeah.
And you kind of slam them there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for me, it's been an amazing journey. It's been a fun journey. It's as you know, it's filled with lots of healing, and it's been really cool for me to be able to process these things with my parents, and for my parents to have that kind of humility as well, to apologize, and as we move forward. Now, I mean, I'm closer with both my parents than I've ever been as a result of all of this. But it's a journey, and I'm it's a battle every day. But I think the most important thing that I've realized in my life, more than anything else, is the importance of finding people who are safe in your life, and then also being that safe person for others. It's
Can
been.
you describe that a little bit? What is a safe person?
Just a brief deal. In my mind, a safe person, just for a real simple example or a real simple definition, a safe person is somebody who lays the foundation for you to feel loved. They provide the conditions for you to feel loved. Right. And I think what ends up happening is, for instance, let's go back to the example with my mom. I mean, I know my mom loved me, but I'm not the type of person, and I talk to sports coaches and stuff, and just like a player, not every player can be coached the same way. Right. We all have unique ways that we need to be coached. I'm not the kind of guy that can be coached by having a coach screaming in my face to the top of his lungs. I'm not motivated that way. Right. Well, when mom was trying to correct me, it had nothing to do with she was trying to correct me in the wrong ways. And I knew she loved me, but the way she was showing love didn't register with me.
Well, and there may have been some sense of irritation at herself, for leaving the coat there, and all of that type of stuff plays into it as well.
Yeah, and so she flew off the handle, angry, and those were her younger days, and she would, if she were sitting here, she would say, yeah, I didn't do that, I didn't react in the way that I should have. And
can I have a do-over?
Do-over on that one. But I use that example because that's unsafe. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to be, at the end of the day, safety is providing the necessary conditions in order for someone to experience love. That's the way that I simplify it down to. Mm-hmm. and there's a lot of ways that we make people feel unsafe. When we blame, when we criticize, when we're trying to speak truth to somebody without being graceful in the process. I think true relationship, true safety is balancing grace and truth in the context of a relationship. Loving a person for who they really are, for who they truly are. They don't have to do anything to prove that they're going to get my love. I love them because of who they are. But that doesn't mean I'm going to leave them there either. If they need some change in their life, I want to be able to speak truth, but I want to show grace in doing that. I think that's safety.
Yeah, I've seen something on Facebook recently. There's a little quote, and I think it actually came from Marilyn Monroe at one point. I can't remember what it is, but it's something like, if you're going to love me, then you have to love me in the worst times and all of that. And somebody wrote a response to that. It's like, yeah, but if you're a total jerk, are we just supposed to say that that's okay for you to walk around hurting people everywhere you go, and we're all just supposed to love you in spite of that?
Well, and I say this quite a bit, that a lot of people will say, well, what's a true friend? Well, a true friend is somebody who accepts me as I am. And I think that's a bunch of hogwash to believe. I don't want somebody to accept me as I am. I do not surround myself with people who accept me as I am.
Right.
I want to surround myself with people who will make me better than I am. And I think that's safety, is having people around. That's true safety. Because down the road, if you're not growing, down the road, you will hit unsafe and turbulent times. I can guarantee it.
Yeah, and if you're not growing, you're probably moving backwards. And a lot of times I think people think, well, if I just want my friends to accept me for how I am. I can accept you for how I am, but if I see that you're damaging yourself and you're doing things that are unhealthy,
right,
and I just sit here and say, well, I just need to accept her for how she is, what kind of a friend is that really?
right.
I mean, to be able to walk up to a friend and say, sweetie, I love you so much, and I think you're hurting yourself here.
Right.
Without being judgmental and condemning and all of that. You don't need to do that. That's not safe. But if you've built a relationship with somebody, especially your spouse or your children, parents, obviously, in the role of parenting, you're not going to love your kids exactly as they are at 2 and say, well, great, I hope they stay this way the rest of their lives, throwing their little tantrums on the floor. You have to teach them how to have better responses to things.
Oh, absolutely. We are living that as we speak.
How old is your little guy?
19 months old, and he's temper tantrum state. But all that to say, to go back to the healing journey, part of that healing journey for me was going through 2.5 years of counseling to see the effects of the divorce on my life, and not only just the divorce, but just family patterns, just generational patterns that were passed down of ways of relating, and I learned throughout a period of time. I stepped out of dating relationships. I chose not to do that, and just I started to learn that I had some things inside of me that I needed to work on. And so I started surrounding myself with friends, just like we're talking about, friends who would challenge me, friends who would look me in the eye, and who I knew loved me at the end of the day, but weren't afraid to help me, speaking the truth in love. And then it ultimately led me to finding my wife, who really is the safest person in my life. I mean, she's definitely will let me know when things aren't going well or I got something to work on. But she does it gracefully, and she, I know at the end of the day, we're on the same team, and that's what's really valuable. So,
Josh, this is kind of a leading question, but if you had not done that work, would you have been able to be in this relationship?
No, because my wife is too independent, and I'm trying to think. My wife is very secure with who she is. And I would have been very insecure around women like her prior. I wouldn't have been able to manage that well.
So that would have felt threatening to you, and then for her, you would have felt too clingy.
Well, I think at the end of the day, if we would have gotten into, because at the end of the day, if we would have gotten into issues, I probably would have started to feel like she was gonna abandon me or whatnot. And I mean, to be very honest, prior to that, I would put I would put girls on a pedestal. I would put them in the place of God. It was like, I needed to find somebody, and once I got married, then that would be my end all, and that girl would save my life, and life would be all good, and we'll rise, right off into the sunset. And, and you believe the lies of the culture, and you realize, it was crazy. So I had to get to a point where I put God up there. God is my boss, and then I could be the leader and the man that God was calling me to be the husband that He was calling me to be. So,
can I ask you a little bit about confrontation? I believe that confrontation is healthy. I believe it's good. I think it's a courageous act of love, because people are human, and you can't, they'll never know how to treat you well if you don't show them and express to them what is not well, how they're treating you. But what I've seen over my life is, because of my comfort in confrontation, is that the response is never good. It's never positive. And for so long, I'm like, wow, people just can't handle confrontation. And now I'm like, it's like that saying, once you realize that you're surrounded by jerks, at some point you have to think about maybe you're the jerk, But like, how do you? I don't know. How do you communicate a loving confrontation with people in expressing how you need to be talked to or related to feel loved, without them internalizing it and feeling criticized and retreating from you? I feel like I've had so many people retreat from me because of a confrontation where I think it's out of love, because I'm being bold and being vulnerable, but it's not ever received well, or it's defended. Or how do you work through relationships like that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I use is at the very front end. I think before I even say this, you have to realize you have to look at the other individual and see, number one, is this a relationship? Is this a hill worth dying on? First of all, is this a relationship that is my feedback is going to be welcomed? Because not everybody accepts feedback, and I think if it's somebody that you know well, and you know that they don't receive it well, then you just have to ask yourself, is this a hill worth dying on? Is this a relationship that I truly want to invest in this way? I think that's the first question. If the answer to that question is yes, then my phrase that I use with individuals would be this: taking the golden rule. Treat others as you want to be treated. But replace the word treat with the word understand. In order to be understood, you first have to understand. And if you yourself are not understanding where the other person is coming from, or they themselves do not feel understood, anything you tell them is going to go in one ear, not the other, and it's not going to be received well. It's like parent with a teenager. As the parent tries to set the boundary on technology or social media, a lot of times parents, they do that lovingly, they do that with good intentions, but they miss that social media and technology, there's a lot of relational connections that these teenagers have there. A lot of their life is wrapped around in that, and if there's not a conversation where the teenager feels understood, and there's a conversation about the types of limits that should be set and why they should be set, and a parent just automatically goes in and tries to set those boundaries, that's not going to be received well by the teenager. And so I
sound like a dictator.
Yeah. And so I use that phrase quite often. I think as you want to give feedback to another individual, make sure person wants to receive it. And then second of all, making sure that you understand where they're coming from, that they feel understood, that they feel like you do have their best interests at heart, before you go ahead and dive into giving them the feedback that you feel like they need.
I had one other side of that, and then we're going to close up here, but I want to let people know we've got another one coming here, so stay tuned next time, because we're going to talk a little bit more about technology and parenting and some of those ideas too. But I find that sometimes when I'm trying to talk to somebody, or they're actually trying to talk to me, a lot of people just want to vent. They vent and vent and vent. And then if you try to offer any suggestion, they really are not in the mood to hear a suggestion. They really just want to vent.
Then you're judging.
Yes, then you're judging, and you're trying to fix their problem. So a standard for me is, do you just need to vent? or did you want feedback? And that seems to be a pretty safe way to go on the other side of it too, because if they do want feedback, then you can feel free to speak. But if they're just venting and you try to offer feedback, they're not going to hear it anyway.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Yeah. That's where I love James, and Proverbs is filled with this, is, be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen.
exactly.
Yes.
And I think that's a good piece of advice to take in these circumstances.
Absolutely. Those couple sentences could save us all a lot of headache, I
Yeah.
think. Well, Josh, thank you so much. Melinda, thank you so much for
Yes.
being here.
Great.
And we're going to film another episode with Josh here too, so stay tuned. But thank you so much for joining us on Broken and Brilliant. See you next time.